All right, so let's go ahead and do some if functions, and we'll use Excel or Google Sheets. You pick whatever you want to use, and we'll get CHAT GPT to hopefully create some formulas for us. And we'll also today do a little different type of stream. So instead of just testing what formula it can give me, I'm also going to talk about the formula and explain the formula. So if you're learning, maybe you're new to spreadsheets, you can also learn about if statements as we're going through this. So I'm actually going to get started by an empty spreadsheet. I've got pretty much nothing here. So I'll just go ahead and add some data to this, and we'll just create that data right here. We'll just say generate 20 lines of data. Let's do sales data. 20 lines of sales data. And let's ask for some columns. So I'll do something like date. We'll do sales rep. We'll add a couple of more things here. So date, sales rep. We'll do region, category. I'll do cost and sales, and maybe status. For now, I think that's enough. So let's see what it gives us. If you want to follow up with me, you can, and you can also generate the data and use it in your spreadsheet if you want. This is what I got, so I'm just going to highlight this, copy it, and paste it in my spreadsheet. Very straightforward. As you can see, I got my data. I'll just highlight this, make my columns look a little better, and add some formatting to this. I'll add some borders, and we'll add some currency format. I think that's enough. So this is the data we just generated, and we'll play around with this. So let's start doing some if statements here. So let's do an if statement. As you can see, we have some sales numbers. So let's do an if statement and check if sales amount is above $200. Let's say we want to apply $20 bonus. So let's go ahead and ask that question. So I'm going to pretend like we didn't generate that data in CHAT GPT. So we'll just add a new conversation here. And I'll just say, I have the following columns in my data. And I'll just paste them here. And let's add our question here. I want to add a formula for a bonus column that will give me $20 bonus if sales amount is above 200. Okay, let's see what it gives us. All right, so there's that formula. So I'm going to copy that. We'll go ahead and paste it in our spreadsheet. So that didn't point to the right column. I was hoping it would point to sales amounts, but other than that, it's not too bad. So if I just go ahead and hit enter, that should give me this. So what it did, it points to this column here, right here, E, as you can see. And what I'll do here, I'll just switch this E to F because our sales are in F column. And our formula is basically this, right? So if our starting parentheses with close parentheses, which is where our function ends, and the first argument in our if statement is our what we call logical test, basically everything you can see before the first comma. And that logical test is checking if that F2 cell right here is greater than 200. And as you can see, if that's true, that it's going to do this first option, 20. And if it's false, it's going to do the second option, which is 0. So if I'd enter currently, this number is above 200, so we should be getting that 20. And if I just go ahead and copy this down, which I can do by just double clicking this little box in a corner, it should drag this formula and you should see every time the number is above that 200 amount, it should give us that 20 bonus. So that works. But what if I don't want all these zeros here? Let's say we want these to be blank instead of being zeros. So let's ask that question. Instead of zeros, it would be nice to get blanks. There you go. So instead of zeros, it would be nice. Let's do that. So here we go. So it gives us a new formula. So I'm going to copy this. And I'll just go ahead and replace this formula. So again, this is not the right column. I could probably have mentioned that, so it adjusts, but I'm going to just switch this to F. So at this point, now it's switched this last one instead of a 0 to be double quotations, which is basically how we get a blank in Excel, right? So a blank meaning 2 quotations, and it's really not a blank. It's more like sort of like a blank. And what it is really just empty text. So if we, for example, had like no bonus here, like some text like this, if I copy this down, it would just give us no bonus in all the other cases and 20 when there is a bonus, right? So it's basically the text in quotes. And what we're doing here, we're saying, let's do text with no quotations. So basically we have our quotations, no text in the middle. So it's kind of like a blank, but it's still something in there. So the reason that could be important that there's still something in there is that there's a difference between having a blank cell and having those double quotes. And the difference is this, like if you look at this, it kind of looks blank, but if you go and check with a formula is blank, if that cell is blank, and if I click on this and check, if I hit enter, you'll see I get a false because it's not really blank. Now, if I do this with a blank cell, for example, if I go over here and do is blank and click on this cell, which really has nothing in it, I will get a true. So this is now a true blank as opposed to the other one, which is not really blank. Now, for those of you who are actually Google Sheets users, in Google Sheets, you can actually remove this double quotes in the end and just keep it empty like this and not have that last argument. And this way, Google Sheet will actually give you a real blank, which will give you a blank when you do is blank check. Now in Excel, that doesn't work. You have to do this double quotes, which is really annoying. Nevertheless, I'm going to do that. We'll drag it down. We have our formula. So that's our first option here. Category cost looks like 1 column, not 2. So let's take a look. Category. It seems like separate columns. I don't know why it didn't figure it out. It seemed like pretty straightforward thing. But anyways, let's move on. So that's our bonus. So we'll do that. We'll add some currency format. Let's do another if statement. So that's our basic if statement, as basic as you can do pretty much. So let's go to the next column here and do another formula. And this time, let's use, for example, something a little different. So let's try to do a formula as the answer for true and false instead of just saying like yes or no, or putting a blank or putting a number in there. So to do that, let's just, again, do something with sales amounts. So I'm going to go back and ask, I have sales in F column. I would like to do a formula that will give me 20% of sales amount if sales amount is above 200. And in all the other cases, I want to get 15% of sales amount. So let's just fix this apples problems that we got here. I have sales in F column. All right, that should be about right. Let's see what happens. So I'll copy this. That's odd. That doesn't seem correct. So I'm just going to go here and paste it here. And you can see this is what it did. So this formula is not correct. So what it's missing is multiplication signs. So it should have been here times 0.2 and times 0.15. This is not accurate. Let's try to ask a follow-up question and see it will fix it probably for us. That formula didn't work. Can you try again? Okay, oddly enough, it gave me exactly the same formula. Doesn't work. All right, let's go correct it. Whatever, I'm pretty sure there is a way to ask it so it will figure it out. But basically, the problem here that we were facing is that here we have to do multiplication, and here also we have to do multiplication. So again, our condition is the same. So if this F2, meaning this sales amount right here, if that is greater than 200, then we want to take that number F2 and multiply by 0.2, which will give us 20%. You can do multiply by 0.2, that works. You can also type 20%. That should also work. So both would be the same output, really. So you can do whichever one you like. I'll just stick with this 0.2. And after the next comma here, we have what happens in all the other cases, which is at 15%. So I'll just go ahead and hit enter, and that should give me some amount. I'll double click on this, and I'll just call this one commission and add some currency format. There it is. So as you can see, we got this, we got that. It didn't do a very good job on this one. I was actually expecting it to do better on this, but hey, it is what it is. So let's try something even more difficult. Let's try to now do two conditions instead of one condition. So that would be like if and combined together. So we have this status here and we have this sales here. So let's try to say that if the status is above, well, it cannot be above. So let's say if the status is shipped, something like that, and at the same time, our sales amount is above 200, let's output some number. So we'll do like 40, otherwise 0. Let's see what happens. So again, I have status in G, sales in F. So let's go ahead and ask that. If status is shipped and sales is above 200, I would like to get $40. Otherwise, let's output 0. So let's see what happens. Okay, that's interesting. Did I misspell that or did it do that for me? Yeah, of course. When it was doing this, it did it. Well, anyways, it is what it is. So we'll fix that. Not a big deal. There we go. So that's our shipped. This is not case sensitive, by the way. If you do lowercase shipped or uppercase, you would be getting exactly the same results. So I'll just go ahead and do, I guess, uppercase. As a matter of fact, I'll do lowercase so you can see it doesn't make any difference. So it will still match. So this is that if and. So now basically we have two functions working together in this particular case. So what we have here, we have our logical test. And what happens after this first parentheses, we start what's called logical test. And basically everything after the parentheses until this comma here is our logical test. You can do some spaces here if it makes it easier to read, by the way. It doesn't really hurt. But we have this and that starts here and finishes here. And basically what and function allows you to do is to provide comma separated list of logical tests, and you can do as many as you like. And it's basically going to give you true if all of those are true. So basically in this case, if both of these things are true, this will be true. And if that's true, we're going to do this 40. Otherwise, we're going to do 0. Now, if I enter, we'll see this is a 0. If I copy this down, at some point, we will get some trues. So for example, you can see like this one, we still get a 0 because even though status is shipped, this sales amount, it's not above 200, so it doesn't match. But this one over here, it does. So both of these conditions are true. So that's a match. It works. This is a match. It works. As you can see, good. So that's if and end. Oddly enough, that was supposed to be more complicated formula, but it did much better job than doing this percentage calculation. That being said, let's just do if and, name this column, add some currency amount, but that should be your example with two conditions. Now here, what you can do, you can add more conditions. And the way you would do that is by basically just add more commas. You do a comma and do another logical test, and you can check if something equals something, or it's less than or greater than, or something like that. So those are the options you have here for checking, by the way. We have greater than, we have less than, we have equals, we have greater than or equal to, we have less than or equal to, and finally, you have not equal to, which would be this, like this way. So in this case, that would be greater. So that works just fine. No problem. Okay, so that looks good. Now let's check how it can handle dates, because with dates, it's a little more tougher to deal with when you deal with functions. So let's see what it does. So let's try to do something with this date and say, if the date is, what dates do we have here? We have like some February 2022s, and then we have a few March dates. So let's say we want to get true for every date that's in the first half of February 2022, something like that. So let's do that. So I'm just going to say my dates are in column A, so it knows where the dates are. So hopefully it doesn't give me some weird column again. And basically, we'll say something like, I want to output current period for dates that fall between February 1st, 2022 and February 15th, 2022. Let's put this current period in quotes. What's the right formula? So this should be probably a combination between like and, if, and some sort of date function. It could be date function, it could be date value possibly. So let's just go ahead and see what happens. So it did this, and that actually looks good to me from what I can tell. Let's just copy this and see what happens. So I'm going to copy that formula. We're going to go ahead and paste it right here. As a matter of fact, just to make it easy for you to see, I'm just going to zoom in more, hide some of those columns, and paste this formula here so we can look at this side by side. So there it is. So between February 1st and February 15th. So there we go. We should be able to drag this down. Now for any date that falls within that period, see 1st and 15th, we got current period. For the rest of these, we got blanks. Now, how does this formula work? This was actually an excellent formula that it did for us. Now, the reason for that is because with dates, you have to be careful when you do some sort of date comparisons in your spreadsheets, because a lot of times you may just think about like just comparing to your date like this. So you may go to your spreadsheet and do, let's check if this date is greater than, or let's just do equals. Let's say equals 2/1/2022. And you might think, well, that should compare if that's February 1st, right? Now, the problem with that formula, see, I get a false. And the reason I get a false, what happens when you do something like this, it will actually think this is division. So it's going to take the 2 divided by 1. Then it's going to take that 2 and divide it by 2022. And as a result, it will get this 0.00098911. So we get this number. Now the question is, okay, so that's a division. I get that. But what does it compare it to get a false, right? And what it compares it to is this number without formatting. And if I look at that A2 cell, that date, and we just evaluate that, see that date is this number 449, actually 593. This is the number it's comparing to this number. And that's the reason we actually get a false. We compared that number to this number. So what is that number, you may ask? Well, that number is, well, all dates in spreadsheets are really not dates. They're just numbers. And the way it works, like if you look at this, see if I remove this formatting and go to general, it gives me that number, that 44,593. And what basically your spreadsheets do, they basically start from 1 and keep going like this, and they keep increasing. And what 1 is, if I, for example, let's actually enter a couple of more dates here so you can see how this works. So I'm going to do 365, 366, 367. This should be good enough. So if I take this range of numbers and just convert it to a date, what's going to happen, 1 is January 1st, 1900, 2 is January 2nd, 1900, 3 is January 3rd, 1900, and it keeps going like this, and 31 is January 31st. Now, at this point, January is over. So 1 day later, which is 32, we're now in February 1900. And as we keep going like this, see, by the end of the year, we're here. So 366 is December 31st, 1900. And one day after that, which is this, we're next year, 1901. So basically what happens here, when I look at this date right here, which is this February 1st, 2022, and this number that we got out of it, all that's saying is that February 1st, 2022, if we start from 1 being January 1st, 1900, if we keep just going up and up and up like this, we'll end up with that number, 44,593. That will end up being February 1st. So all the dates you have in your spreadsheet is basically offset from some starting point you get and this many days after that. And the reason that's beneficial is because that allows your spreadsheets to do date calculations. So what I mean by that, if I, for example, have two dates, let's say I have like February 4th, 2022, and then I have another date, let's say March 17th, 2022. If I wanted to know how many days difference between these two dates I have, how can I get that difference and how does it actually work, right? How does it know? Well, it would be very difficult to do this math because like if you think about different years have different number of days in February. So now we would have to figure out like in this year, do we have like 29 days or 28 days? And based on that to figure out how many days we got in February and then add the days in March and all of this. But we don't have to do any of that because these two things are just two numbers. So if I just switch them to general, you'll see all I have is just two numbers. There's this number and this number. And if I just go here and say, let's take this bigger number minus the smaller number, it's just basic math. Now this is formatted incorrectly. So let's just go back and go general again. So you can see it just gives me 41 because this number minus this number is 41. And that's exactly how this date calculations work. So when you have two things that look like a date, like this, and then you go and you do a formula equals this later date minus this earlier date, and you get a number, basically what that number is that number. What it does, it basically removes the formatting, takes those two numbers, and does this number minus this number, and you get your difference is 41. And that's how this result actually works. And if I just go here and evaluate this by pressing F9 on each one of these, you'll see that it reads this cell as this number, and then it's going to read this one as the other number with no formatting. And basically, it's going to do basic math. And that's this. Now, how does this work with this if statement then? So with if statements or logical tests, when we do a comparison, if you're going to compare this A2 to something, to compare it to today's, well, not today's date, but that February 1st, you have to figure out what's the right number for February 1st, 2022. And the right number, just quickly to look at what it is, it's 44,593. So basically we could say it equals to this. And if I hit enter, now I get true because, well, that's that number, right? It equals to that. But we probably don't want to do this. This is not a great formula. So Excel has functions to get that number. One of those functions is date, and the other function is date value. You can get with both. Now, date is better, and I'll explain you why. So date value is going to take text date and convert it to that number. So the way it works, since it's text, it's going to be in quotes, and you would basically do your number like this. And this would be our February 1st, 2022. And what this is going to do, it's going to take now this, and it's going to convert it to that number, and then it will compare it to the other date. And as you can see, this is true. This comparison works. Now, the reason this is not a good practice, doing this, is because there are different formats of dates. Now, in the US, for example, this is February 1st. But if you're in a different country, you may look at this and you may think this is January 2nd. So, and depending on your settings you have on your computer, this same formula can actually produce different results because we're hard coding text in the formula. So that's the reason why it's best to avoid this and use date function. With date function, there's no confusion. All you have is 3 separated arguments: the year, comma, then you have the month, and then you have the day. And you basically just do this, this, this. And that way it will actually do the comparison. And at this point, you can check if it equals, if it's greater than. And of course, because it's logical test, we can put it inside of if function. So we can say if this, then comma, yes. If it's just some text, otherwise, no. And that would be that comparison. So if you hard code a date in a formula, use date function. Otherwise, just use a reference to a cell that has a date in it. So that's pretty much what it did for us here. If you look here, what it does, because it has to do 2 conditions, because the date has to be both greater than or after February 1st, and also should be less than or equal to February 15th, we have 2 comparisons. Therefore, we again have this AND function, right? Right here. So this AND function, see, it starts here, it ends here. And then in the middle, we have 2 logical tests. This is the first one after the parentheses until this comma. And this is the second one, which is going to be our second logical test. So if both of those things are true, then we're going to get this, which is current period. Otherwise, we're going to get a blank. And that was that formula. Basically explained how exactly this works and why when you do date comparisons, you kind of have to be a little careful. You can't just type the date in a formula just like that. All right, so that was good. Let's unhide this. So we did some if statements, like basic ones. We did some if and. This was also if and with dates. Something like that. Let's also do a formula that checks if a cell is blank, then reacts on that. Like, for example, I'll do something with this bonus amounts and say yes when there's a bonus. So let's go to that. I'm going to say H column. So basically, I'll just say we have that bonus in that H column. Some of them are blank. I want to do a formula. If the bonus is blank, then I want to output yes. Otherwise, I want to output no. Okay, so let's do this and copy this. Now, this formula is not going to work because it's doing is blank. So if I go back and take a look, that's not a bad formula necessarily. It's just not going to work in this particular case. So if I hit enter, it's always going to be no in this case. Now, what's going on here? Again, let me just hide some of these so we can be right next to this column. So what's happening here, we're checking if this cell is blank, then yes and no. And remember, when I was creating this formula, we did this double quotes. And when you have double quotes, which are these, they're not really blanks, they're kind of blanks. And this is the reason why this doesn't work, because the way it looks at it, it basically thinks, you know, it's not really a blank when it is blank. So let's go and ask a follow-up question and see if it will give us an alternative, because what it should do, it should check if it equals double quotes. This didn't work. Is there an alternative? Oops, didn't have to do that again, but this formula that it gave me This seems correct. So I'm going to copy that. Let's go back, paste it. I probably didn't say yes and no in the right spot. I should have done no the other way, but this formula now works. What we probably want to do, however, switch yes and no. So we would do no here, maybe yes here. And now for bonus, it will say yes. Otherwise, it will say no. And that's good. So now we're checking if it equals double quotes. So with this double quote check, both if it's blank or if it's kind of like a blank with this double quotes, it's still going to give you true. So even if the cell was really blank, it would still give you the same results. So this is that double quotes option. We have our yes and no. You can always switch your formulas from equals to not equals. So you can shift this formula the other way. You could say if it's not blank, so if it's not equal, then you could say yes here and otherwise say no here. And that would work too. So you can think about not equals as switching true and false results. So basically, yes and no will flip places if you do not equals instead of equals. And there you go. If it's equals blank, not equals blank, pretty good. So we can do that too, as you can see. Let's see what other if statements we may want to do. That could be interesting here. Maybe we can do like or. Let's do something with the sales rep. Which column was that? So let's go ahead and add that B column. I want to create a formula that will give me manager for John Doe and Jane Smith. Let's put manager in quotes. Maybe that will help it figure out that that's the value. There it is. That's the OR function. That actually looks pretty good. So let's copy this, go back to our spreadsheet. I'm going to hide some of these columns again. Let's just paste our formula here. So there you go. So that will give me manager every time it's John Doe. Did we not spell Jane? Oh, it's James. Should be Jane. Okay, so you can see now for John Doe and Jane Smith, I got manager. For these, not a manager. And again, for these, it's a manager again. So that's our OR with if function. If I go back here, let me just zoom out a little bit so that this shows on a single line. So this is kind of syntactically identical to AND statements, but instead of AND, you just use OR. So basically here, we're saying this is our logical test, and we have two things we're checking. We're going to check if it's John Doe, if it equals John Doe, and John Doe has to be in quotes because this is text. And then Jane Smith, the same thing, text. So if both, well, not both. So with OR statement, what happens, you're basically saying if at least one of these is true, then give me true. So basically what it means is that if this is true, or this is true, or maybe you have more. You can do comma here and add more and say B2 equals some third value, like who else do we have here? Mark Lee. Has to be in quotes. So you can keep going like this as many as you like, right? And similar with AND function, you can just do more comma separated options here. And if it's one of these, then good. So that's going to give us manager. Otherwise, it's going to give us blank. So as you can see, that works just fine. No problem whatsoever. So it gets us the values. Now, most of them are going to be managers because I changed that, but this one is not. So blank. There you go. That's your if statements. As you can see, with if or, if and, if with a blank, quite a few of them. With dates, you can get an example. So I think that covers like a lot about if statements you would need to know. And you can see that it did a pretty good job with most of them. It did fail with some basic things, like, for example, this one. It didn't do this one right to multiply things correctly. But other than that, it looks pretty good. And that should do it for today. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you next time.